Do I just have to turn it on? Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, public comment. At this time, the mayor will recognize members of the public who have indicated their desire to address the council. Upon recognition by the mayor, persons may address the council from the podium, first stating their name and address. The council may take action on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. Anyone from the public wish to address the council? Please, just go right up there to the podium and state your name and address.
Kyle Welniak. I'm at 913 South Maple Avenue, and I would like to have my potbelly pig as a pet in my house. According to the section 952 for animals and fowls, it says permit required, but the ordinance officer said that there's no actual permit that she has that she can offer. He's a 35-pound pig. He's just a potbelly pig. He goes outside. He stays in the house most of the time. I simply would like to have him be able to, be my house pet.
Okay. All right. We'll have to talk to ordinance and see what that's about because oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Butke.
Yeah, actually, I brought that up about chickens and there was something else, and then somebody mentioned about potbelly pigs. The ordinance was going to look at that and see if there's been any issues in other communities. So it's still in the works for them to come back with a recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public wish to address the council? Final call. Anyone from the public? Seeing none, we'll go on to item D, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from July 23rd, 2019? See a motion by Mr. Hendler, a second by Mr. Bargender. Mrs. Spiros, you have a... No. Okay. All right, please vote. That motion carries. Item E, staff updates.
Thank you. We have a couple this evening. I'll start a reminder of upcoming special meetings. Council has two meetings. I know we've talked about them before, but I just want to make sure they're on your calendars. Thursday, August 29th at 6 o'clock, there'll be a meeting here, and we'll be hearing from the non-government organizations, as we usually call them. These are the folks that will be looking for funding in the 2020 budget that are not part of city government. So it'll be them presenting for a few minutes and then answering questions, and the meeting will probably take an hour, maybe a little bit longer. And then the next week on Wednesday, September 4th, there'll be a meeting here with a consultant, if you will. His name is Ed Miller. He's from UWSP, and he'll be discussing ethics, conflict of interest, public officials liability, open meetings and public records laws with us. We've invited, or we are inviting, I should say, the committee members to be here as well. So as much of it involves something that would be of interest to our various committees, boards, and commissions. So that's Wednesday, September 4th. That'll be at 6:30, giving them a little bit extra time for people who might have difficulty, grabbing a bite to eat and getting here if you're committee members. And I'll keep those in front of you so that we don't miss those.
All right, item number 2, report on open containers at Hub City Days. Rick Gramza.
Thank you. I had promised that I'd come forth and let you know if there was any issues or any concerns that we had. at the most recent event that we had for allowing the open containers at an event, and we didn't. There was no issues whatsoever. Talked to the officers that were patrolling it, spoke with Kaylee Gomez from Main Street Marshfield, and all reported no concerns, no issues, and there's actually quite a few of the attendees that were appreciative that there was some leniency with that allowance of open containers for Hub City Days. So thank you for that.
All right, and number 3, new employee introduction. Justin, did you want to do that?
Not here tonight.
Oh. And his name is Tom Herkert?
No, he'll be here.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Item F, mayor's comments. Just two, brief one. First of all, next week is the state fair. A lot of preparation has gone into this, so it's going to be a lot of fun with the cows and the high divers and all the stuff going on there. So it is from the 20th to the 25th, so I hope you can get out and enjoy that. The second thing is, just very briefly, we all get these packets, the Common Council and myself, we get these packets. This one I think is 170 pages long on Friday, sometime on Friday in preparation for tonight's meeting. And normally, but I always print mine out and then I read it on Sunday night and Monday night in preparation. As you go through these things, what you really see is how incredibly lucky we are here at the City of Marshfield, the city staff, with the time and input that you did to this, and the countless volunteers on the boards, commissions, and committees. As you read through the minutes, and with the minutes, you just get a small flavor of the meeting, but how much they care for this city, it really is impressive. So I just wanted to recognize city staff and all the members of the committees, boards, and commission for a great job that you do. Thank you very much. Item G, council comments. Any council comments? Did you have your hand up, Mr. Bucky?
I did not miss.
Mrs. Spiros?
Hopefully you can tell the difference.
Yep, go ahead. Your turn.
I just want to address the gentleman who spoke about the pig. Is he still here? Anyway, since he already has the pig, can we make a conscious effort to get moving on this, whether there is an ordinance, isn't an ordinance, and can we have that brought up at the next council meeting? I think that's only fair, you know.
Yep. Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. To piggyback off that.
That's ridiculous, man.
Wow.
I didn't say potbelly piggyback. I guess if the ordinance says that they should have be getting a waiver or and there is no such thing, I guess I'm wondering why that's in the ordinance if there's no exemption form to fill out that ordinance doesn't know about. So that, I think, like Mrs. Spiros said, needs to be addressed quickly.
Absolutely. Anyone else from the council? No? Item H, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. None? All right. Item I, the consent agenda. Entertain a motion to receive and place in file, approving all recommended actions in the consent agenda. A motion by Mr. Butke, a second by Mr. Fire. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. The motion carries 9-0. The next item, item K, we're going to put one item in front of item K. We're going to, at the request of the chief, move up item R. Request to approve resolution number 2019-33, allowing an exception to section 9-461 of the Municipal Code to permit open containers. 2019 Central Wisconsin State Fair, presented by Rick Grams, the police chief.
Yes, thank you. With the success that we've had in having the open containers at the other events, and speaking with Central Wisconsin State Fair group, we would also like to have the open container resolution offered for the fair as well. What you have in front of you is a resolution similar to what you've seen in the past. It outlines the areas of concern or of coverage. I also included a map that I handed out just prior to this meeting What that map does is it shows those areas on the fairgrounds that will be covered. It also shows a portion of 17th Street, which is closed to traffic. But I also included that, and there should be an updated resolution in front of you as well. So the area covered would be the Central Wisconsin State Fairgrounds property and East 17th Street between the fair gates, which are between Vine and Peach. Those areas highlighted on that map would be the areas that we would like to have the open containers permitted. Where you see on the map where it says no, that is those areas where if you bought a beverage at the fair, you couldn't bring it into those areas. That includes the campground area, the ball field area, and then the parking lots that are outside of the fairgrounds. Otherwise, the other areas which are highlighted on that map would allow for people to walk around with an open container. And again, for those that this might be new to, the reason we want to do this is to maybe have people drink a little slower, be able to walk around and enjoy their beverage rather than having to leave their beverage with somebody else or to have to drink their beverage faster than they want to. If they need to go out and use a restroom, or if they're with their family and they want to walk around the fair. So asking for this resolution to be passed, it would cover the fair, which is next Tuesday through Sunday. And the times are listed on there. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but would otherwise look for approval on this resolution. And we do have some of the fair employees here that are willing to answer any questions, I guess, if you have some.
Okay, so there is a motion by Mr. Fire, a second by Mr. Hendler. Before I get to the council, Deb, do you want to make an update to that?
Yeah, we'll need to make one correction to this map. You cannot include the curling club because that's a licensed premise already, and you cannot carry in on those premises.
Okay, I'll make sure that adjusted.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I see on the map that the track area is identified as no, but I don't see in the resolution that that's identified, specifically called out. It is called out about the campgrounds. I don't see the call out about that track area.
Yeah, and on that part, I wasn't exactly sure. I know that the Marshfield Softball Association owns parts of that, and so that's kind of the area that I was considering no. The other parts of the track are, I don't know if those are fairground property. I can add that onto that resolution as well, I guess, before it's signed.
Okay, the concern I would have with that is I know that having volunteered at the fairgrounds for various events, especially some of the events that involve motorized vehicles, and forgive me, I don't know for sure that there's a demo derby happening this year or not, but there's been concern, of course, if you're operating something like that and there's an open container, you'd have an issue. The other question I have regarding enforcement, we've had 2 events now downtown. Both events, I believe, involved some sort of a wristband identifier that allowed those that were patrolling to be able to keep tabs, so to speak, on who had been approved to be carrying. Is something similar to that going to be happening? The reason why I question is because the fairgrounds is a much bigger area, obviously, than downtown. When we're looking at a lot of areas, buildings, I mean, I would think it'd be kind of a patrolling nightmare to see who's sneaking behind the barn to give a beer to their buddy who's not of age. So I'm just kind of curious if there's going to be some sort of enforcement in that route or not.
Yeah. Annually at the fair, we have anywhere from 4 to 6 officers on a daily and nightly basis, uniform patrol officers, and then there's also anywhere from probably 4 to 6 auxiliary officers that are monitoring and taking enforcement action when necessary. We actually just had a meeting this week with the beer vendors and the licensees that are on the property there, and the determination was that we were going to go with the wristbands. We had talked wristbands, hand stamps, what would be easiest? Do we need to change the color per day, or do you just give it out if somebody pulls it off and they come back the next day? So as far as those logistics, I'm going to let the fair make that determination if they want to change the color, but there will definitely be wristbands, and they will notify us of what those are prior to the start of the fair.
Okay, thank you. I do want to comment to the rest of the council that I have had a constituent call asking to back this, so I intend to follow through with what's been asked. Just want to let the rest of the council know.
Mrs. Spiros.
In the past, have reported I'm especially more concerned with this is supposed to be really geared toward family, a lot of young kids, the rides there, you're back to Beach Street, which we all know is the, I think good conscience, not believe it.
Mr. Bargander.
I backed the open containers at the Hub City Days purely because I know that's a more adult-oriented venue there. To be honest, I did see people bring in beer, okay? And, you know, I don't know how you're going to stop it at the fair. I mean, people sneaking in beer. Like Mr. Witzel said earlier, it's going to be a kind of a logistical nightmare monitoring all those gates, all those people throughout the fair. I wouldn't have a problem with this, but the midway thing really bothers me, where all the kids are. Mixing alcohol with the kids down at the midway. I guess if this could be amended, that the midway would not be included, I would support this resolution. Otherwise, I am voting no. Thank you.
Mr. McSwain.
Yeah, the wine walk was a pretty controlled environment. I believe the Hub City Days was a pretty controlled area as well. Wasn't that during the daylight hours too?
Yes.
So this would be at nighttime as well?
Yeah, and it's well lit down there. It's, yeah, the lighting doesn't concern me, but it's, yeah, it would run until the fair closes, correct.
Mr. Butke.
I'm going to support this. I believe, and Mike, you may know, or Dale, I believe there's other fairs that have done this for a while. And I have heard of no major issues. So I don't know if you guys want to respond to that. I will support.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same question, more as a question. What other fairs do this, and what is the result of that? And I see Mr. Fire over there really anxious to talk, so I don't know if I want to let him answer this question.
Not really, but I think that you'll find out that most of our fairs right now are operating the same. This is what we're trying to do now. And I haven't heard of any fair that's had a problem. And I think Dale can probably say the same. There has no, the culture of drinking has changed so much than when we were kids back in the 60s. It was a little bit different.
60s?
Life has slowed down a little bit. People drink less. So I don't think you'll have any problems with this all now. If you would have done this back in 65 to 70, you might have had a problem with it, but not anymore. We're getting too old to get in any trouble.
Mrs. Spiros.
I'm just going to reiterate, my concern isn't just this particular fairground, but you know, we have a big substance abuse problem in the entire country, United States of America, and I feel like alcohol is one of those substances, and so for adults to bring their children to the fair, to ride the rides and to see the animals, and then just to throw it back willy-nilly, and then take their children out, strap them in their car seats, and drive. I just don't understand what the necessity is. If you're going to be there bringing your kids to the fair or whatever, I don't know why you can't have a night off not, drinking. I just, that concept baffles me. It takes a village to raise children in a substance abuse country. I just don't think it's the best thing to do.
Thank you. Mr. Witzel.
Thanks. One more question. We do have ordinances against public drunkenness. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's disorderly conduct. It falls under disorderly conduct. There's also other alcohol-related offenses that one could have outside of a vehicle.
So if there were issues happening...
Oh, it would be addressed immediately. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
And just to add on to that, I agree. And I mean, we combat substance abuse on a daily basis. As an optimist here, I see that this could slow people's drinking because people are going to drink at the fair if they choose to drink at the fair. They're going to drink when they're with their family if they choose to. And most people drink responsibly. So the fact that they're consuming beverages, whether it's on the midway or walking through the round barn, or if they're drinking maybe a beverage faster than they want to, and now they're going through the midway, they're still going to be consuming alcohol to a certain extent that they choose. If I felt that this was going to, I guess, place children in danger, I won't even be bringing it forth. If I feel that this does place children in danger, I would put a stop to it. It's not my intent to place anybody in harm's way. It's not my intent to encourage substance abuse whatsoever. But it's also to help, especially if many fairs in the area are doing this. And from what I'm told, they've seen an increase or boost in attendance and profits, which we all want to see for our fair. I would say let's give it a shot this year and gauge it based on how it goes and move forward with that.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros.
Just one more time. I don't mean to insinuate to you that you would put children in harm's way. I know that you never would do that intentionally, and it wouldn't be even your responsibility. It's the parents' choices and the decisions they make. But, I do think that, Wisconsin, typically, if we look at all the statistics, cities in Wisconsin typically fall in, very high in the top 20 most drunken cities. That's been something that's been in our history now for several years in a row. So I just feel like sometimes it's second nature to this particular state. But in events that focus around children, which I think the fair should focus around children, that's typically what a fair is for. I just think it's the wrong place for time.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, please vote. The motion carries 6-3. All right, item K, request to approve resolution number 2019-32, resolution awarding the sale of not to exceed $15,475,000 general obligation corporate purpose bonds, series 2019A, introduced by Ron Allman, Finance Director.
Thank you, Mayor. I have Dave Ferris from Ehlers here to announce the results of our bond bid today, and I think we timed it good with interest rates dropping. As you recall, the issue is a combination of things, refunding some debt issues that had a higher interest rate, secure permanent financing on this building, and then also the routine 2019 borrow. So Dave's going to cover the results of the bid, and we'll be available for questions.
Thank you for letting me be here to give you your results of your bond sale today. As you know, earlier today we took bids on the city's 2019 general obligation corporate purpose bonds, and we got some pretty darn good results for you tonight. The one report that Ron passed out earlier is our sale day report. If you would turn to page 1 of that, it is a summary of what the transaction that happened earlier today. As Ron said, the purpose of the borrowing was to not only fund your 2019 projects, but to refund some issues, some for savings and some for structure purposes, to kind of help out with the tax increase that was potential because of the way the levy came out last year. We had really good success. We typically look to have at least 3 bids. We had 7 bids today. Your low bidder was Baird out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with a true interest rate of 2.1478%. If you look at pages 3 and 4, this is a listing of the underwriters that bid on your bonds today. Baird, as I said, was the lowest, and the high bid was Northland Securities at 2.3951%. The difference between those bids, and the nice thing about that, having all that competition, is you're able to save $426,000 between that low bid and that high bid. So competition really does wonders to your rate. As far as the amount of the borrowing today, there was a premium on your bond. And when we have a premium on the bond, especially on the refunding portions, those amounts that are premiums can go to downsize the bond. So what we were able to do with the premium is downsize your issue by $480,000. that in conjunction with the interest rates we got today actually saved you $907,000. Let's see here. I had it written down here and I can't see it. $907,000, almost $908,000 in principal and interest over the life of this bond issue, which that's compared to the pre-sale report that I presented here on July 9th. The one thing that we should talk about a little bit is the rating. Moody's, the city staff, and other staff had a conference call, and we went over some of the information as far as the financial status of the city and some of the development going on. And the one thing that Moody's seemed to key in on is some of the things we talked about the last meeting with how the reporting changed with the fund balance, the advances being reported, and they kind of really grabbed onto that, and they unfortunately downgraded the city from a AA3 to an A1, which is, it's not something you ever want to see happen. But I think if you look at the interest rates you got today, that you did awfully well anyways. 7 bidders is outstanding. So the one thing that came out, and I don't know if Ron wants to chime in, is that when we talked to Moody's, we really pressed what we told you a month ago, where there are some things that are happening already that are turning things around. Halfway through, even where they were evaluating how your financial status was, your values came out, and I think I'll let Ron talk about the values that changed with the TIF districts, and actually I'll elaborate on that.
Sure, and if you read the full Moody's report, part of their phrasing is they put some of the downgrade on what they call underperforming TIDs. And like Dave mentioned, we kind of fought that language to try to get it to something like previously underperforming or historically underperforming. And I even said to Moody's, we'll consistently tell you they're doing extremely well. And the preliminary values came out last week, and we had a total of 25% growth in our TIDs, and every one of them is showing a surplus. So we thought that phrasing was a little inconsistent. So we have a follow-up call with them to see what they call that. We knew a ratings decrease was possible, and giving all the changes, we now feel that our financial statements are accurately reflected, and if Moody's feels that's where we're at, we do have a path back as we continue to build fund balance and build our cash back up. One thing they did mention during the call is they said that we have a relatively high level of debt compared to cities our size. And when we break it down, at the end of 2018, we had $43 million in debt, and we had to point out that $17 million of that is TID debt, and those are doing well. But it is something I think we have to consciously look at is as we go forward to try to keep debt out of our TIDs, because even though it does pay for itself, it does kind of clog up our balance sheet and our rating. Any questions for me, or I'll let Dave continue on here?
Mr. McSwain?
Sure.
Do we have any idea of what it would have taken for this fund balance? Because we had a dramatic drop in that, and that was quoted. Do we have any idea of what we might have been able to stave off, some of our devaluation?
Well, unfortunately, when I only have 6 years of your financial statements that Ron sent me when we started, and it looks to me like the problem existed probably 6 years ago, at least, maybe even farther, where there was an amount that was being used to support the TIF districts, and it was only this year that the auditors made that change from the basically the current receivable line to the long-term line. And so when we look at that and we look back, we think that maybe this issue has been going on for quite a while, and that it just, it finally got corrected this year when we started asking questions.
Well, I guess what I'm looking at here on page 11, when it shows from rather dramatic drop under the finances category, the fund balance numbers there, that is a rather dramatic drop in the 1 year. Is that drop a significant factor, and could we have done anything to make that less significant? Would that have mattered?
Sure, and I think maybe for a future council meeting, I'll probably have to show it both ways, because we're now at the point where we're not really comparing apples to apples. If you recall, our general fund balance actually increased in 18. It was the auditor classification that put the TID part into a non-spendable, and it clearly triggered a metric that Moody's looks at. Even though we did explain it, we did show cash flows going forward on and how we expect to pay it back. It obviously is a metric they look at. So what we could have done different, probably not a lot with the reclassification. I know definitely for next year we can look at minimizing the amount of those advances and see if there's any give to the auditors on classifying some of it as more current.
But building up the general fund wouldn't have been a significant factor.
It's not something that you can do automatically. When I was here last month, we kind of showed you that, that we think the fund balance will come back by, somewhat by 2023. And with the numbers that came out from the state at the beginning of August, what we were able to figure out is TID 7 having such a great increase in value this year, instead of being paying off its advances or basically loans by 28, 29 is actually going to be done in 23. So we're actually seeing that you're probably going to make a quicker recovery than we first thought, just because TIF district is doing much better. But unfortunately, like I said, I mean, the numbers you're looking at here, if Ron were to put them into the same sort of fashion that 2018 looks like, these numbers would be more consistent with 18. So.
Thank you.
Okay. As far as the money that you'll get in, the closing on the borrowing is on August 28th. That'll be in time for you to be able to pay off the NAN for this building, which is the note anticipation note. It also give you the funding to be able to start paying for your projects, and then in the middle of September is also when the rest of the debt issues are going to be called and paid off as well. Just to go through a couple of the schedules so you know what's in this report as well. If you turn to page 5, is kind of a comparison of the preliminary, which was what I presented last month, to now. The amount of project needs changed just slightly because we part of the premium has to be put into the debt service fund to apply against interest for next year. So that's the only reason there's different in the project needs. As far as issuance costs, you can see that big premium that was given to you by the underwriter, and what that does is it actually gives you money up front to pay, to downsize your interest, and that or downsize the size of your issue, and that way you have less in principal and interest over time. The other thing that was a difference is the underwriter fees. It's broken out into 2 lines right now. It says insurance, but what happened is the underwriter decided to take out insurance on the issue. And what that does is it actually makes your credit rating look more like a AAA because of that. And so it makes it a little more saleable to their investors. So that's basically the difference on page 5. Page 6 is basically the way that we kind of solve for the debt service rate. I think when I was here last month, that highest amount was at about $2.28. Because of the downsizing, the amount that the levy needs to go up next year, instead of it being at about $358,000, I think it was $384,000. The increase next year it needs to be $276,000. So we were able to cut off $100,000 of levy increase. The levy rate is a little closer to where you were a couple years ago. And one of the things that really was big, and I don't know if Ron has told you about this, but your actual equalized value, if you look at like the third column from the left, went up 6.68%. So you had some really nice growth this year. It'll be interesting to know what the net new construction is to see how much you can raise your levy in the general fund. So that's obviously going to be a big help. So as you can tell, the rate on the right side, it starts at 211 in 2020, and we've built in some flexibility because we know you have some projects coming up in the next couple of years on your list, and we try to build in some flexibility to build those projects in. There's some things that may bump it up above that you have on your list, but this is going to give you some flexibility going forward. The other thing on this page, just to demonstrate the $907,000 of savings, You can see on the bottom of the page, you see $480,000 because we were able to downsize the issue, which decreased interest expense by $405,000. And then they also had that bid premium that reduces your next year's interest payment by $22,000 for that $908,000 savings. The next page is just the breakout of the payments by the different funding sources, other than the new money is the first two sections where we had broken it out by the useful lives to match the repayment to the useful life of the new assets. And then it has the amount that's levy refunded issues, and then the other funding sources of TID 5, 7, and EMS. Page 8 demonstrates the effect on the debt limit calculation. You obviously had about 15 million, almost 16 million in here in the pre-sale. With that coming down 480,000, that debt limit percentage is coming down, and you can tell as that's falling, that's also giving you flexibility for new debt. The next page, page 9, is the refunding analysis. And what I did is I put the pre-sale numbers in here. It's kind of that tannish color underneath those totals, but you can see that at the bottom of the page, the total refunded issues had negative cash flow of $766,000. The main reason that's negative is because the note on this building, it wasn't something where you were refunding something that was out there. It is something that you're funding permanently. If I took that out, you'd see, you obviously have a pretty significant savings cash flow wise, but we had predicted $1.3 million and you only had a cash flow loss of $766,000. So you can see where that issue savings came into play. And then the net present value of the savings, obviously almost, little less than double, but great result there too. I won't go through the rating, but you have that you can read on your spare time. We already kind of talked that the financial status is one of the reasons that Moody's changed the rating, and we'll apply the things that we've been going forward positively and being able to see that's going to be positively to try to get that rating back up. And then the last page is kind of page 17 is how the interest rates have been going. I think as Ron said it best, you hit this at a pretty good time. A little bit of trade war talks last week really dropped that rate. People are running to more safe investments, and municipal bonds are about as good as you get for safety. So congratulations on a great sale. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Can I just ask you, one of the things you said early on was that there was it looks like a trigger in 2000 or 6 years ago, probably 2013.
It could be farther back.
So we don't know. So then that was just kind of where you picked up on it.
Yeah.
Do you believe just the way it was being done before wasn't correct, or is there something significant about 6 years ago where you were able to?
That's as far back as I had statements. Ron could probably go back farther in the city's statements. I just didn't have access to them. But there is about a $5 to $6 million interfund receivable from mainly the TIF districts. And if you carry that through over the years, it really never moved. It might have gone up or down a little bit. Okay. And so I think the auditors this year just made a determination that it was long-term instead of short-term.
Okay. Any other questions from the council? All right. Didn't we already have a motion? So. No. All right, then, is there a motion to approve resolution number 2019-32? Read there. Yeah. Yep. Motion by Mr. Butke, a second by Mr. Fire. Discussion, please, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. One real quick question. What would you attribute the high volume of bidders to? I've been here for a few years and I've never seen 7. I think I've seen 3 at the most. What would you would it be the uncertainty of the stock market that people are looking for that safety, or what would be?
Well, there is quite a demand for municipal bonds right now, but I think also the size of the issue is also attractive to more bidders. I mean, Morgan Stanley is somebody I don't really see bid on things very often. So the size of your issue this year, I think, had a lot to do with maybe a couple of.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, please vote. That motion carries 9-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item L, second reading of ordinance number 1413, amending section 13.37 of the Municipal Code regarding responsibility for maintenance of the public terrace, presented by Tom Turchi, City Engineer.
All right, this is just a request to change and modify the definition for terrace. As you're aware, the terrace is typically the location between the sidewalk and the back of curb and gutter and located within the city right away. This request basically will change that to mean any point lying between the property line and the back of the paved surface, or if there's a trail between the trail and the paved surface. This recommendation was approved by the Board of Public Works. Therefore, I'd recommend approving ordinance 1413 attached, amending section 13-37 of the Municipal Code regarding the definition of a terrace.
Thank you. A motion to approve ordinance number 1413. Motion by Mr. Witzel, second by Mr. Hendler. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. That motion carries 9-0.
Thank you.
Item M, second reading of ordinance number 1414, campus master plan by the Marshfield Clinic Health System, represented by AECOM, to adopt a 5-year campus master plan that describes the existing conditions and future plan developments for the campus. The campus master plan includes the following addresses, as well as adjacent and nearby property zone CD, Campus Development District, 1515 North St. Joseph Avenue, 1307 North St. Joseph Avenue, 701 Cowshed Street, 605 West Cowshed Street, 611 North St. Joseph Avenue, 510 North St. Joseph Avenue, 601 North Pine, 611 West Daggy Street, 803 West North Street, 1000 North Oak Avenue, and 1001 North Oak Avenue, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a second reading, so I'll just go over rather quickly. Last Common Council meeting, Jim Lynn from the Marshfield Clinic Health System gave a presentation on the campus master plan. Basically, the campus master plan described the existing conditions for the campus, as well as their their plan for growth over the next 10 years or so. Essentially, they're going to focus on more of renovations rather than larger additions. There's also a few minor additions that are planned over the next 10 years. But the Plan Commission recommended approval of this plan on July 16th with the conditions listed in the staff report. And since this is a second reading, it is recommended that the action is to approve ordinance number 1414. Thanks.
Thank you. There is a motion by Mr. Fire and a second by Mr. Peschel. Discussion, Mr. Butke?
Bryce, are any of these properties tax exempt currently? And if so, could you tell me which?
I don't believe if there are.
I know there are some.
Within the district. There are a lot of properties, so there is a chance that there might be, but the majority of them are owned by either the clinic or some are still owned under, I think, the old hospital system, I believe. But the majority, I'd say 95% are owned by one of those two entities. So if there is one, maybe the Ronald McDonald might be.
Yeah, and last time when the gentleman was here from the clinic, I asked that question, if they foresee any more tax-exempt properties, and he stated no. And I hope that's the case, that they're not looking to make more tax-exempt. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion carries 8 and 1 abstain. Item N, second reading of ordinance number 1415, request by Wesley United Methodist Church to rezone property located at 209 South Maple Avenue, parcel 33-00880, from SR6, single family residential, to DMU, downtown mixed use, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. So the subject property is currently in the process of selling their lot to the Wesley United Church, and the two lots plan to combine. In order for the two lots to combine, they should be of the same zoning district. So the Wesley United Church to the south is zone DMU. In the future land use map, it is identified as being in the downtown mixed use district. The applicant will need to get exceptions to the front, street side, and side setbacks for the DMU district. They will be going to Plan Commission next week, and then earlier today, about 30 minutes or so, a variance was granted for a rear setback variance. So with that, Plan Commission reviewed this on July 16th, and they recommended approval of the request. This is a second reading, and so the recommended action is to approve ordinance number 1450.
Thank you. There is a motion by Mr. Butke and a second by Mr. Witzel. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. That motion carries 9-0. Item O, second reading of ordinance number 1416, amending section 10.3 of the Municipal Code on forfeitures for parking violations, presented by Rick Ramsey, Police Chief.
First reading was last week, or 2 weeks ago. Assistant Chief Pat Zepps had brought this to your attention 3 weeks ago. I forgot that we had weeks ago. How about weeks ago? This was brought to your attention initially. Through our focus on this is to not only change some software that we're looking at, but to be in better alignment with some of our neighboring communities. State statute actually lists that we were below where we should be when it comes to parking enforcement and parking violations. And with these adjustments to ordinance, that will bring us more in line with what those parking regulations should be and should have been. And then ultimately, with a software program that will be going to automate our parking ticket process, it's ultimately a free program, and the fees are pulled out of those citations. So what this would do is we'll pay for that program in and of itself with this increase as well. So I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, look for your approval.
Thank you. So there is a motion by Mr. Witzel, a second by Mrs. Spiros. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Motion carries 9-0.
Thank you.
Item P, request to consider petition for annexation of territory owned by Paul Lang for 2 parcels and an outlot, including portions of the right-of-way totaling 9.43 acres, more or less, to be detached from the town of McMillan and annexed to the city of Marshfield, located in the town of McMillan, Marathon County, Wisconsin, lying west of North Central Avenue and east of North Beach Avenue, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. City staff received a petition for the annexation of 2 lots and an outlot located to the northwest and southwest of the intersection of Highway 97 and County Road E. Traditionally, the Common Council refers this item to the Plan Commission, who then makes a recommendation to you guys on the annexation request and permanent zoning for the lots. So with that, the recommended action is to refer this item to the Plan Commission, who will then make a recommendation on this annexation request and permanent zoning.
So is there a motion to refer to Planning Commission? It looks like a motion from Mr. Hendler, second from Mrs. Spiros. Discussion, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. Looking at the map that was provided in the packet, it would appear to me that all of the property surrounding this is already in the city limits.
Correct. Yeah. So essentially what this would do is this would remove a town island, which is something that not only the city of Marshfield, it would be in our best interest, but also the state has been trying to push that as well, because it just makes things a little bit messy. So you are correct. Everything except for like the northeast. But yeah, it's mostly surrounded by city property.
Okay. And why now all of a sudden?
Well, it's the Langs that decided to petition for annexation, so I'm not quite sure, honestly.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, please vote. That motion carries 9-0. Thank you, Bryce. Item Q, request to execute an agreement with the Juneau County Housing Authority for administrative services related to the Community Development Block Grant Revolving Loan Fund Housing Grant Program, presented by Josh Miller, Development Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier this year, actually January 1 of this year, we lost our program administrator for the basically our housing repair program, which is through our community development block grant revolving loan fund. This allows low-income folks to apply for basically a loan. It's a deferred loan that they get repaid once the property sells or once they no longer own the house. In order to provide those loans out, we need to have somebody that administers the program. We don't have the training and staff to do it, and typically for the last few years, CAP Services has been doing that, but they're no longer doing that for either the city nor for Wood County. So we sent out an RFP last month that was approved by the Finance Budget Personnel Committee. Typically, we'd be going to them, but because of the timing of the approval, we're coming straight to council. So hopefully that's okay. There's about $50,000 in the fund right now that we can allocate for projects. A portion of that has to be reserved for administrative funds. We did get 2 proposals with our RFP and 2 very good proposals. Both entities and would do a great job, we feel. But in reviewing it with the Housing Rehabilitation Committee last week and the week prior, and following up with some additional questions, we felt the Juneau County Housing Authority would be the preferred entity to administer the program. They also handle the regional program in this area. So kind of how it works is we would utilize our funds in Marshfield. Once all those funds are utilized, we could use the Wood County funds that are available. Once all those are utilized, then we would be bumped up to the region. So that consistency has some value as they are administering for the region. Additionally, they have more staff than the MSA proposal, and we felt that their marketing plan, they do active marketing for this program, so which we feel is very beneficial. The funds that are used to pay for the program do come out of the project fund essentially, so it's no cost to the city other than utilizing the revolving loan fund dollars. So the Housing Committee did recommend the Juneau County Housing Authority as the administrator, and we would ask that the council approve them and direct staff to execute an agreement with them.
So is there a motion to authorize staff to execute an agreement? A motion by Mr. Pescial, a second by Mrs. Spiros. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Motion carries 9-0.
Thank you.
Item S, request to consider the city's participation in the Convention and Visitors Bureau new branding approach, presented by Steve Bard, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. I think back in June it was when Matt McLean from the Convention and Visitors Bureau was here. He made a presentation on their new branding approach. They're calling it Marshfield Made New. The intent of this initiative is to kind of tie the past and the future together, taking a look at our rich heritage and trying to preserve it and take the elements that are real positive from that the people appreciate here and fold it into looking forward and what we'd like to see Marshfield become in the future, how we can use some of those assets and some of those elements to try and move ahead in terms of tourism, economic development, and those types of areas. So I have in your packet tonight the PowerPoint that the CVB has put together. We did have a meeting that involved representatives from Mackey, CVB, City, and others, sort of the community partners that work along with CVB, to see if people were on board with this idea, if we could work together so that it's not just CVB using this new branding approach, but also it ties to the other economic development partners so that we appear to be unified, rightly so, because we're trying to attract people to the community in various ways. What came up is that there's 3 options for the city, and one is full integration, another partial integration, and then the third one was called brand mention. And the request from CVB is how do we want to try and tie ourselves to this branding initiative? The concern city staff has had by reviewing this is, truthfully, as much as we want to be connected and we want everybody to see that we're all one, we're trying to attract people to move here, build here, spend tourism dollars here, but we need to remember that we are a provider of local municipal services, so we have to have a different look and feel. We can't look like the website perhaps of others. So what this would be putting in the footer and that portion of the sidebar of our website, the insignia, I believe, and the reference to Marshfield Made New, so that they can see that we're all together, and yet anybody looking at the city's website would still recognize who the city of Marshfield is and that we are different in that we're a local government. So with all that said, staff would recommend that the council approve going forward with option 3, the brand mentioned, and that I be authorized to pass that decision along to the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Thank you. There is a motion to approve option number 3 by Mrs. Spiros, a second by Mr. McSwain. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Motion carries 9-0. Let's see. Discuss item T, discuss proposed restrictions governing use of electronic devices at city meetings, presented by Steve Bark, City Administrator.
Thank you. Back on July 9th, the council discussed the possible idea of adopting a policy that would greatly restrict the use of electronic devices during these meetings. There was concern about a variety of things, including open meetings law violations. We talked a little bit about the city of Madison, who got in trouble for council members texting one another, quite frankly, during some of the meetings, and they got called on the carpet for that. So I went back and I took a look after being directed by the council to come up with a policy proposal. I did check with other communities and other counties, and I really didn't find other cities that had good policies to work from. I did find 2 counties that had something good that I was able to take and kind of piecemeal and put together for the proposal that's in your packet. So I want to kind of go through this, what I've got in your agenda packet. The first part of it is just to say that technology is obviously an important part of what we do. You're all sitting here tonight with laptops. Some of you have cell phones as well. We use technology every single day. It's important to how we conduct business. But there are a couple concerns that come up from the use of electronic devices, or could come up from the use of those devices at these meetings. First of all, a distraction and possible disruption to conducting the meeting. Secondly, the actual or perceived violations of open meetings law that could be taking place by communicating with one another, by communicating with people out of this building in ways that could be either really truthfully open meetings law violations, or at least look like we're bending that law. And then the third part is just the perception. If I'm sitting here and we're all on our phones while people are talking at the podium, or peers on the council, it gives the appearance that we're not really listening to them, and that can be as disruptive as legal violations. So for those reasons, I took what I could from these 2 counties and put them together, and there's I'll just kind of read it. That the 5 items would be: cell phones should be placed on vibrate prior to the start of any meeting so that those calls do not disrupt. Second one is that no one should answer a cell phone call while in a room when the meeting is taking place. If you were to get yours on vibrate, it's a personal, important call. Go out in the lobby or somewhere else to take that call. Electronic devices may only be used for purposes of reading materials provided for that meeting. So whether you're on your laptop or your phone, you really need to be looking at only the agenda and the documents related to this meeting. The fourth one is that electronic devices may not be used to engage in email, texting, social media, or instant messaging of any kind. I think we've talked about this Facebook Live thing we're doing right now, and we're not taking comments during the meeting. The idea is that we really don't want people interacting with social media or people in those types of ways during the meeting. It could be disruptive, and they're not here to participate or be questioned. And then finally, electronic devices may not be used to engage in any business unrelated to the city of Marshfield. That speaks for itself. We don't want people up front here, especially participating in other activities. We all do that on the side as far as other uses of the internet. So we're really saying that the use of electronic devices up here would be limited specifically to the city business at hand. Now, I have a note down at the bottom of the policy. We talk about who's affected by this. For purposes of the policy, that those directly involved, which is who are affected by this proposed policy, will be defined as everybody who's on the governing body, elected or appointed. So it applies to commissions and committees as well, who are sitting up front, whether that be Plan Commission or other groups. And any other city staff or other officials that are anticipated based upon the agenda to participate in the meeting, whether they're expected to address the governing body from the podium or otherwise. So in other words, if it's thought that you're going to give some sort of input during the meeting at some point, you really shouldn't be on electronic devices communicating with others in ways that could appear that you're not violating, or that you're not adhering to the spirit of the open meetings law. In talking with the staff on Tuesday, or I should say on Monday, we talked about the fact that you see many of our staff on their laptops, even as we speak right now. And they are able during these meetings to conduct other business related to the city. I think the city attorney's perspective is that if any of those individuals are anticipated to be asked to come to the podium and comment on issues on the agenda, they really shouldn't be doing that. The feedback I got from department heads is that is a little bit uncomfortable, because like I said, they're oftentimes here for 2 hours and they're able to take care of some things during this meeting. But the way it's written right now, it would apply to those who are anticipated to be asked to be part of the meeting in some way, shape, or form. So it's put out there tonight, not for approval, it's put out for discussion review. Once we have a policy embraced by enough council members, what I would do is work with other city staff to put it in the policy format, figure out where it would be slotted in our list of policies numerically, and then bring it back to a subsequent meeting for approval.
So is there a motion to direct staff to prepare a policy for adoption? A motion by Mr. Butke, a second by Mr. Hendler. Discussion, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that this not only addresses those that are specifically engaged in the meeting, but also any that may potentially be engaged in the meeting. One thing I would like to, though, maybe amend would be in the second section, the allowances and disapprovals would be bullet number 3. Electronic devices may only be used for purposes of reading materials provided for that meeting. I think that that's important, but I also believe, and I know myself personally, have utilized the city website and resources available from the city and the city website in some of our discussions. For example, the city map, where we're provided with a map of something that we're discussing, rezoning, whatever else, but sometimes the map that's provided maybe doesn't give a good, clear picture, so I jump onto the city website, onto that map that shows the surrounding properties, kind of shows where that property is in conjunction with the city. So there may be resources within the city's website that would also be of value in the discussion that would be pertaining directly to what's being discussed. So I guess I would like to see maybe an exemption to that as well, where that could be utilized instead of just the packet that's provided, is what this is basically stated. And that may be the intent of the ordinance, but I think if we want to stick with the letter of the ordinance, we want to make sure that we have that in there.
Steve. Thank you very much. So if we were to amend it to say something along the lines of, rather than provided for that meeting, related to the business conducted at the meeting?
Something along the lines of city materials provided for the meeting or other city materials related to the meeting would be fine. I think the emphasis is other city materials. I don't want to be just jumping off on some other site saying, well, I'm researching Facebook because there's this, I think it needs to be city provided materials.
Thank you. Mr. Butke?
Yeah, I just disagree with having a cell phone in here even on vibrate. Mine's at home, and if you want to leave it in your vehicle, that's fine. Otherwise, all 10 of us got a mailbox out here that's locked up. So we could put it in there during the meeting and retrieve it afterwards and see if there's any message at that time. So you know what's going to happen. If somebody's got their cell phone here, they're going to get a call and there's going to be a
Thank you. Mr. McSwain?
Yeah, I guess I got a reservation about not having the other people that are other officials being able to use their things for doing business. First of all, I don't know how this will apply to police or fire. I mean, they certainly can't be ignoring anything. But anybody else, does it really, if we're talking about pot-bellied pigs, does a finance director really have to be paying attention to that discussion? I don't think so. These people are here for specific purposes, and I think the more work they can get done, I don't want to stand in any of their ways.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros?
With all due respect, I understand possibly what the thought process was behind this, but I want to reiterate, like, I'm not grade school. I want to bring my cell phone and have it in my purse. I'm gonna bring my cell phone and have it in my purse. What are you gonna do? Like, check my purse at the door? You have to make an ordinance that you can enforce, and I'm pretty sure that nobody's gonna be digging through my purse or my pockets when I'm sitting here. So you have to be mindful of what you can enforce and what you can't enforce.
Thank you. Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. Under the 5th item, and I don't know if this is what Mr. McSwain was relating to or referring to, but it says electronic devices may not be used to engage in any business unrelated to the city of Marshfield. To me, that states that if staff are doing city business that's not directly related to the meeting, but it's city-related business, that's acceptable. Which means they can continue to work if they're talking about potbelly pigs and want to look at finance. I mean, that's how I read. Is that a correct understanding of that?
I guess maybe I would defer to thoughts that the city attorney might have about the current wording, whether or not the wording in the packet would allow that type of use or not.
You know, it probably does based on that language. Mine, I reviewed this since I came up.
Right.
I think this political body policy apply. So you've got a broad. I know also that I think the discussion had been, at least from the administrator's point of view, that the idea was to limit staff in terms of the materials they were looking at probably at the meeting. But I think the purpose of this meeting should be for you folks to weigh in on that to the extent. One thing I'll caution you based on the discussion that you've had here is that I'm not sure that any specific direction has been provided that the staff can use to come back and modify this. So some thought might be made in terms of making motions to change specific language, because otherwise I'm not sure how you do that. I've heard each individual make a point to maybe perhaps make a change, and I think that's fine and good, but then I'm not sure that that's the consensus of this body, so that's something to look at. But legally, from a point of view, the language I think actually is broad enough to say it's any city business. I don't think actually that was the intent, probably in terms of the more narrow point of view that was perhaps the design of that particular language. But I think this body should weigh in on that in terms of what you want to see.
Okay, and do I still have the floor?
Yes.
Okay, and as I had mentioned back in July when this was first discussed, there's the concept of, are we violating law, or is there even the potential perceived idea that we're violating law? And as has been brought up at a lot of meetings that I've been to, specifically at league conventions, it's stated over and over again, don't be the case study. Don't be the case study. So if we can have something in place that identifies that we have a prohibition to certain items like this, and perhaps locking our cell phone in a mailbox is maybe a little extreme, I would agree with that, but I definitely think that it lends to perhaps misconception if all of a sudden I'm here doing this during a meeting when I should be focused on something else. And so I think having something like this in place protects us from becoming the case study, and I think that it is valuable. I just don't know how far reaching, especially the locking up a cell phone thing would be. If necessary, I would go ahead and offer an amendment, but my understanding was that this is discussion to kind of see the direction we would go. You would then vet out with what's been presented a final policy, in which case then at that point, we would either vote on that policy or maybe amend that policy to meet specified items.
Yeah, thank you. My goal is to come away from this meeting with whatever changes you want to see so that the policy you bring back will reflect that. So a couple of the comments have been made, as the city attorney said, I'd like to have some basic consensus as to whether you want those folded into this or not.
So just to be clear, just to be clear, Mayor.
Tom Witzel, his button is.
Who's that?
Tom, you're not asking to say more, are you?
No, I am.
Oh, you hit your. Oh, Hal.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that makes sense, Alderman Witzel, that the idea would have been to come up with this and then they bring a draft back. But we've gotten so many different comments, some of which I don't view as a consensus. Alderman Buckhead mentioned about locking it in the mailboxes. I don't think there's a consensus necessarily to do that. So if we're looking at that, I just think that as the discussion started to sprawl out, I'm not sure enough direction was made for a decision to be made, because this really, in my view, was a model. Even as we spoke, I felt that the way that the language was maybe not as tight as Steve had even intended based on our discussion. But the idea was to put something out there, get some feedback, and move from there. But it did seem like we've gotten spread out enough that I'm not sure anything's there as far as being able to make a change. So that's the only reason why I thought, maybe some consideration as to an actual motion or something to say, hey, why don't we direct you to go down this road for these particular items may make sense. But that's up to this body's discretion.
Mr. Butke. I'm sorry. Yep. Who's a motion to amend? Okay. Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. I would amend bullet point 3 to include other city-provided materials related to the topic, as I had mentioned earlier. And I guess I'll wait then to talk.
All right, Mr. Butke.
It was not my intent to say you had to lock your phones up. There was discussion that you had to put your phone on vibrate. Like I said, mine's at home. If you don't want to leave it at home and you're worried about leaving it in your car, especially in the winter or whatever, there's an option that you could put it in there where it's safe, where nobody's going to say, I do not believe the cell phone should be here. Because we are supposed to be doing business for the city, not talking on our phone. And I think pretty much all of us have been guilty at one time or another with a cell phone. So that was just an option. I do not think that it's mandatory they had to do.
Just one second. There's nothing to amend. There's nothing.
You're looking for a second.
Okay, all right, okay. I see what you're saying. I'm sorry. Mr. Wetzel's motion was we have to go with your, was there a second? I don't see it.
Yeah, explain in a second.
Explain.
You want my motion again?
Okay, no, I
We
did not see that part. Okay, so there is that to amend it. All right. So that's what we're discussing now.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Wetzel, go ahead and say your
Okay,
motion.
my motion was to amend the third bullet item that says electronic devices may not be used for purpose. Oh.
May only.
May only. Wow, I got to put my glasses on. I'm sorry. Electronic devices may only be used for the purpose of reading materials provided for that meeting. I wanted to amend to say, or other city provided materials related to the topic of discussion.
All right, Mr. Butke.
I don't think we're ready for any motion or amendment on this at all because all the discussion we had here, what I understood that Steve was going to look at that and bring things back at the next meeting, and then at that time we could amend things as we wanted to. So I'll vote no on the amendment at this time.
You're absolutely right, which is why I questioned it, is because Steve's taking notes here to go back and create something that will then come to be voted on. Right now, we're amending something that we don't have yet. We don't have an ordinance yet. So, Mr. Happ.
Just procedurally, what I think you're doing here is you came up with a draft. Normally, you probably would have just had a discussion and he would have brought back something based on that. But we were so far all over the board that my thought is that you make a motion that this body can give its consensus on as in terms of amending what he's got as a draft. That then will come back to you as another draft that you can then vote on. And if there are changes at that time or whatever, you can have them then. This is not the ordinance by any means, and technically it's a policy, but this is not the policy. What it is it's directing, you're making a motion to direct staff to amend what they have as a draft to include this provision. It may very well be the next time you meet or when this does finally get to you that you take that back out. But the idea is just for purposes of bringing the draft back to the body, that there had to be more direction. That's the only thing I was concerned about.
So is there any further discussion on the motion to amend? Motion. All right, seeing no further discussion, please vote.
Mr. Mayor? So then, really, with all the discussion we had, the rest of us should be making amendments to what we want. Okay.
Everyone voting?
Yep.
Mr. Butke?
Very good.
That motion carries 5-4.
No.
All right, so now on the initial motion to direct staff to prepare policy for, you know what? I think we need to make this real easy. I think we're all in agreement here on the fact of we as council, mayor, and everyone up here, we really should not be on our phone while we're listening to fellow council members, staff, people presenting, because even though it might even be city business, but the perception is not right. And it could be anything. So, I mean, I understand we need to go through this, but there's a perception of, are we breaking open records laws and things like that? It's very true. But the bigger one is, I think, respect to each other and respect to the community. So we're back to the motion to direct staff to prepare a policy, which we already had, correct? A motion by Mr. Butke, a second by Mr.
Are you
Farr.
making a motion to amend?
I will.
You got to hit
He
it
wants
amend.
to amend.
Mr. McSwain.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to say that if there's an understanding by everybody else here that the city workers won't be prohibited from doing their work on their thing, then that's good. I don't, as long as if that's the understanding that we have of that, under what you have here.
Yeah, and along those lines, if that's the consensus, that would help me in terms of working with the city attorney to frame it that way, to not preclude them from doing their work in the policy you see on August 27th. If that's the body's view.
I'd like to make sure that that's possible.
Amendment. Written there now.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit confusing though.
We'll make sure it's clear.
Yeah.
Clarify. When you
Just to
withdraw.
clarify.
Mr. Butke.
I will make an amendment to, if we're gonna have cell phones here, they be turned off during meetings.
You'd like to make an amendment that if we are cell phones here, that they be turned off. That's your motion. A second. Mr. Fire, you have a second to that? Yeah.
You have to.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't up when I said that.
There we go. All right. So there. Got to keep your button pushed. And so now there's a motion to have the cell phone turned off. A motion by Mr. Butke. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Fire. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. That motion carries 5-4. So now we go down to the initial motion of direct staff to prepare a policy for adoption. Any further discussion on that? Seeing no further discussion, please vote. And that motion carries 7-2. Item U, request to appoint Bill Pinker of 600 Sycamore Avenue to complete a vacant term ending April 30th, 2020, and Allison Hawks of 2706 South Felker Avenue to complete a vacant term ending April 30th, 2022, both for the Historic Preservation Committee, presented by Bob McManus. There is a letter in here from Allison Hawks, and also everybody, I believe, is very familiar with Bill Pinker. There's nothing needed tonight. There's no pressing historic preservation meeting come up. This is just the first reading. Any questions or anything regarding that? Nope. All right, item B, request to appoint Mac McLean of 1206 Fairview Drive to complete a vacant term ending April 30th, 2020 on the city's communication committee, presented by Bob McManus. Y'all know Matt McLean from the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I think he'd be a great asset to that. Again, tonight, there's nothing critical there, no meeting coming up that's critical, so just a first reading. And item W, request to appoint Bill Pinker, 600 Sycamore Avenue, as first alternate to the Zoning Board of Appeals, presented by Bob McManus. Again, you're all very aware of Bill Pinker's qualification. There is no action needed tonight. Any questions on that? No, we'll go on to item X, adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes, chapter 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business. Whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, possible acquisition of property in TID number 4, possible assistance for project in TID number 10, and closed session under Wisconsin statutes, chapter 19.851G, conferring with legal counsel for the government body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, possible litigation involving contracted services. Motion to go into closed session by Mr. Peschel, second by Mr. Hendler. Seeing no discussion, please vote. Motion carries 9-0. Thank you. We are in closed session.